Rome, the 2nd century AD. A wealthy Roman citizen walks toward the public latrine attached to his home early in the morning. There, tied to a long wooden stick, sits a sea sponge, soaking in a bowl of salted water. This was the one tool used by every Roman citizen for personal cleaning. And remarkably, this same sponge was shared, one person after another, by the entire community. Yes, today we're talking about the one thing almost every home uses more than anything else. Yet nobody ever stops to think it might actually have a history. Toilet paper. And this story is stranger, more surprising, and at times far more amusing than you'd expect. For thousands of years, humans tried countless different methods for personal hygiene. In ancient Greece, people used small broken pieces of pottery called pessoi. In desert regions, sand and smooth stones were common. Across India and much of the Middle East, water became the standard method, a practice that continues for billions of people even today. In rural Europe, people used grass, leaves, and moss. But the most fascinating twist in this story comes when we turn to China. And this is the part that surprises almost everyone who hears it. In the 6th century AD, China became the first country in the world to use paper for personal hygiene. One Chinese scholar even wrote that he felt hesitant to use paper this way, because paper at the time often carried sacred texts and philosophical writings, and using it felt disrespectful. In other words, nearly 1,000 years before the Western world even considered the idea, China already had something resembling toilet paper. But it wasn't available to ordinary people. It was reserved strictly for the wealthy and the royal family. By the 14th century, under the Ming Dynasty, a single imperial factory was producing millions of sheets of paper every single year, but exclusively for the emperor and the royal household. Each sheet had a fixed size, and for the emperor himself, factories produced especially soft, perfumed paper. Ordinary citizens had no access to any of it. Now the story shifts west, and from here, things get even more interesting. By the mid-1800s, in both America and Europe, people still relied on old newspapers, torn pages from mail order catalogs, especially the popular Sears catalog, or pages ripped from old books. This was completely normal. Nobody thought twice about it. Then came 1857, and a man in New York named Joseph Gaiety. Gaiety introduced the world's first commercially packaged toilet paper, flat sheets infused with aloe extract to keep them soft. He was so confident in his invention that he printed his own name proudly on every package, a surprisingly bold move for the era. But here's the twist. Gaiety's product failed. Badly. The reason was simple. Most households already had free old newspapers and catalogs lying around, so people saw no reason to spend money on something they could already get for free. Once again, a genuinely revolutionary idea had arrived far too early for the world to accept it. The real breakthrough came in the 1890s when two brothers, Clarence and E. Irvin Scott, introduced something remarkably simple yet transformative: perforated toilet paper on a roll. Instead of individual sheets, the paper was wound into a long roll with a thin line of small perforations running across it so it could be torn off cleanly, section by section. The idea was so simple that people later wondered why nobody had thought of it sooner. But the Scott brothers faced a very different kind of obstacle: social embarrassment. In that era, even mentioning toilet paper directly in advertising was considered improper. So for years, the Scott Company didn't put its own name on the product at all, instead selling it under other companies' names, simply because the social stigma of the era was too strong to overcome. By the early 20th century, a new and rather unpleasant problem emerged. Early rolls of toilet paper often contained tiny wood splinters left over from the manufacturing process. In 1935, a company called Northern Tissue proudly advertised that their product was now splinter-free. And yes, that was genuinely considered a major selling point at the time. It's strange to imagine now, but for consumers back then, that single claim was a real reason to choose one brand over another. As the decades passed, the technology kept improving. In 1942, the first two-ply toilet paper was introduced, offering more softness and strength. By the 1970s, colored and scented versions began appearing on store shelves, adding variety to what had once been a purely functional product. Today, toilet paper has become a global industry worth billions of dollars. In the United States alone, roughly 7 million tons of toilet paper are used every single year. It's a product most of us use without a second thought, yet behind it lies a surprisingly long history full of royal secrecy, failed business ventures, deep social embarrassment, and the eventual rise of a massive global industry. And here's one final surprising fact. Even today, more than 70% of the world's population still relies primarily on water rather than paper, essentially continuing a practice that dates back thousands of years, long before paper ever entered the picture at all. So the next time you reach for this ordinary, everyday item, remember, hidden behind it is a story of imperial secrecy, failed inventions, social taboos, and the slow, strange journey toward becoming a product used by nearly every household on Earth. Sometimes the most overlooked objects carry the most unexpected histories. If you enjoyed this hidden story, subscribe to Hidden Origins, because every week we uncover another surprising true story behind the everyday objects you never think twice about.